The National Health and Medical Research Council, the NHMRC, undertook the largest review of the evidence on homeopathy that had ever been done. In 2015, they released their findings. There are no health conditions for which there is reliable evidence that homeopathy is effective.
We took a very good look at the Australian report, all, I think, 600 pages of the documentation that we were given. Here we have a major research organisation in Australia, a government agency, conducting a review that took years, and I don't want to think what it must have cost, and yet it is fundamentally flawed. They said we are going to look at all of the existing evidence for, I think it was 61 named diseases. So we thought, interesting, they're going to find the great studies we have on childhood diarrhea, they're going to find the really strong studies on hay fever. So, I picked up the document, went straight to the chapters for those conditions, and they said, we have no reliable evidence it's effective. So immediately alarm bells go off, because you're thinking, how did they not find them? So we had to take another look through at greater depth and say, okay, for each of those conditions, how did they look at the data and what did they do? And that's when we really got concerned.
Many problems with the report were uncovered. Having no subject experts on the advisory committee was unprecedented in the NHMRC review processes. It was a breach of mandatory NHMRC standards. To determine if a study was reliable, the NHMRC Homeopathy Working Committee developed specific exclusion criteria. One was the sample size, the number of participants in a study. The NHMRC determined that no study was reliable if it had less than 150 subjects.
I never read anywhere that you needed at least 150 subjects in a study in order for it to be considered valid. So it's just an artificial delineation that they seem to have made.
NHMRC routinely funds and collaborates on trials with less than 150 participants, which are not regarded as unreliable.
I was really curious about why they picked 150 out of thin air. And I thought, well, it's interesting the impact of that decision, because, for example, there's a really high quality study that's been done on hay fever that had 144 people in it. And in the Australian report, it talks about that study and it says it's high quality, but it says it had 144 people in it, so it's gone.
The clinical evidence reviews of the British Medical Journal, the BMJ, do have a minimal sample size threshold. Randomized controlled trials with at least 20 people are acceptable, although these criteria vary between reviews depending on the subject area. Where little or no evidence is available, we may include trials of fewer than 20 people.
Focusing on the 150 is a straw man. It's a very easy thing to target. The bigger issue is that none of the studies themselves, we could have drawn it at 70 and you would actually find the same answer. We did give advice that could be open for criticism. My personal view is that it might have been a mistake to use that as a criteria. But I can tell you that it would have made no difference to the outcome.
It did make a very significant difference to the outcome. The overview started with over 1,800 studies. The bulk of these were not suitable for review, leaving 176. Because of the 150 participant sample size cutoff, 146 were thrown out. That's 83% of the trials with their findings not considered further. The remaining 30 studies had to pass through yet another threshold for quality, which was set at an unusually high 100% level. Only 5 studies made it through. 4 of these were negative for homeopathy, and 1 was positive, meeting NHMRC's own criteria for reliable evidence. This study was strangely excluded from the findings. If the BMJ's minimum sample size of at least 20 subjects had been used, only 10, a mere 6% of the trials would have been dismissed as unreliable due to insufficient participants. 166 of the studies would have been included and analyzed further, producing a very different outcome. When the final report was published, NHMRC announced it had conducted a thorough review of the evidence, and the conclusion is based on the findings of a rigorous assessment of more than 1,800 papers. To defend the 150 sample size threshold, NHMRC explained that the homeopathic trials in the review were continuous outcome studies. They cited a BMJ paper to authenticate the cutoff. Yet the BMJ paper advised that its findings could not be applied to continuous outcome studies because such trials usually differ in medical condition, risk of bias, sample size, and statistical analysis. NHMRC has been unable to justify this discrepancy. Research protocols are an important safeguard to prevent bias in scientific studies. Before a study begins, a protocol is established outlining in detail essential aspects of the project, including how data will be analyzed. Making significant post hoc changes is a recognized source of bias, as the reviewers may alter the method to achieve a desired result. Any changes made must therefore be fully disclosed and justified. The research protocol for the review was agreed and finalized in December 2012. The protocol did not include any sample size threshold for trial reliability. Optum then completed its evidence assessment by March 2013. A month later, the NHMRC created a special homeopathy working committee subgroup. Its purpose was to further refine the research protocol, which included developing the unique concept of trial reliability, which meant a trial had to have both more than 150 participants and an unusually high 100% quality rating. These trial reliability thresholds were developed and applied more than 7 months after the original protocol was finalized. These changes were never reported. Before the review had commenced, the NHMRC's chairman, Professor Michael Good, revealed NHMRC's pre-existing bias towards homeopathy when he publicly disclosed, "Let me assure you that I am no supporter of homeopathy. As chairman of NHMRC, I can also assure you that NHMRC does not support homeopathy." The working committee contained a member of Friends of Science in Medicine, a major skeptics organization who believe alternative medicines, which they call pseudosciences, are putting the health of Australians at risk.
The chair of the committee was a member of the Friends of Science in Medicine, a group specifically set up to eradicate complementary medicine from the Australian healthcare landscape.
When an active Friends of Science in Medicine member, Professor Peter Brooks, was appointed as the chair of the working committee, this represented a major conflict of interest. The NHMRC disclosure form asked if he had an affiliation with any organizations opposed to homeopathy. He checked no. When it was discovered that he had this conflict, Brooks was asked to step down as chair, but he never acknowledged this as a problem. In his letter, he said he had stepped down because he had other commitments.
On the 9th of April 2014, NHMRC published its draft report for public consultation. Homeopathy stakeholders were not notified. On the 8th of April, the day before the release of the report, Friends of Science in Medicine published an open letter congratulating NHMRC on its findings. In the letter, the co-founder of Friends of Science in Medicine, Professor Alistair McLennan, declared, "The Australian NHMRC has found no evidence for its efficacy and no plausible scientific reason why it should work. The government must now ensure that Australians are not sold snake oil." The NHMRC CEO, Professor Warwick Anderson, reiterated this message after release of the final report in 2015.
It's an entirely different matter when people who are ill with a treatable illness are pushed therapies that don't work and in fact are often implausible, pushed by practitioners who we must assume either believe in magic or perhaps are just dishonest. Ill health has attracted charlatans since time immemorial. Snake oil merchants wanting to take your money by promising false hope.
In May 2014,
NHMRC contracted a research group, the Australian Research Centre for Health for Women and Babies, to assess extra studies submitted. This group had no experience relevant to understand and interpret homeopathic evidence.
the ARCH research team contained Friends of Science and Medicine supporters. NHMRC made no disclosure of the conflicts of interest in this research group.
In 2013, NHMRC sought independent peer review from the Australasian Cochrane Centre, who advised NHMRC that the definitive nature of NHMRC's conclusions did not accurately reflect the research on homeopathy. Cochrane advised NHMRC that no reliable evidence does not seem an accurate reflection of the body of evidence, particularly since a substantial proportion of small but good quality studies shows significant differences in favor of homeopathy. NHMRC ignored the advice and did not disclose it to the Australian community. The NHMRC hired a first contractor to do the review. The evidence statement protocol used by the first reviewer would have allowed for the reporting of positive research on homeopathy. Within days of submitting the final draft report, their contract was terminated.
If they've published this report as the most rigorous and most extensive research into homeopathy ever done, why not also tell the world and the Australian public that actually we had two bites of the cherry. The first time didn't give the answer we wanted, so we did it again. I think people want to know that. We asked them under freedom of information, please show us a copy of the first review. And please, in letters we wrote to them, can you detail specifically what methodology did you use and how did it differ to the Optum review? They refused to provide us a copy of the first review, and they've refused to give us details of the methodology for the first review.